right, let's dive in. Today we're going deep on a guy everyone knows, Joe Biden. We're going to trace his whole story from the beginning to the White House and beyond. We got a few things to help us. We've got his Wikipedia page, which is, the usual starting point.
Of course.
Then we've got this bio from the Department of Defense Education Activity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. A little surprising, right?
Yeah.
And then this Upworthy piece, which focuses on some of his wins as president.
It'll be fascinating to see what we find when we put all these together.
So to kick things off, can you give us a quick rundown of Biden's background? Like, where did he come from?
Well, he's got a classic American story. He started out in Scranton, Pennsylvania, working-class family. Later, they moved to Delaware. Those working-class roots, those early struggles, they really shaped his worldview. How he sees the world. It's where his empathy for everyday people comes from.
His Wikipedia page mentions that he wasn't the best student. He even had a stutter. I wonder how those early challenges affected him.
That's a good question. It's not hard to imagine how those experiences could make you tough, make you want to connect with people, maybe even push you to prove yourself. And, we see these themes all throughout his life, both personally and in his politics.
The bio mentions he was raised Catholic. Did that influence his political views at all?
Oh, absolutely. Catholic social teaching is all about community, social justice, having compassion for people who are less fortunate. You can see these ideas throughout Biden's career, even as his politics changed over time. Also, the Catholic faith really values personal connection, a tactile approach to interacting with people. That's been a big part of Biden's style. Sometimes it's gotten him in trouble, but it's definitely a defining characteristic.
We can't talk about Biden's early life without mentioning the tragedy in '72, right? He lost his wife and daughter in that car accident, just as he was elected to the Senate. I can't imagine how he coped with that loss, let alone continuing his political career.
It's hard to fathom, isn't it? It speaks to his resilience that he didn't just walk away from public service. The grief must have been unimaginable, and to have the strength to carry on.
Yeah.
It's incredible. In a way, that tragedy highlights how deeply committed to family he is. It's something you see throughout his life.
He did remarry a few years later to Jill Tracy Jacobs, and they seem like a very close family.
They do. And that focus on family shows up in his political image, too, A lot of people say Biden connects with people on a personal level, almost like their family. It probably goes back to how important those bonds are to him.
Okay, let's move on to his political career. It's quite a story. He won a Senate seat at, 29? That's young.
It is.
Was he some kind of political prodigy?
Well, maybe not a prodigy, but definitely ambitious and clever. Remember, he held on to that Senate seat for 36 years.
36 years.
That's not just luck. He must have understood the political game really well and known how to change with the times.
Wow, 36 years. That's almost 4 decades in the Senate.
Yeah.
He must have been involved in some big stuff during that time.
Absolutely. His time on the Judiciary Committee was a big deal. Remember the Bork hearings in '87? They were super intense. It was all about a Supreme Court nomination. And Biden was the chairman, so he was right in the thick of it. People had really strong opinions about how he handled those hearings. Some praised him, others criticized him. But it showed us something about how he thinks about the law and how willing he is to stand up for what he believes.
Speaking of standing up for what he believes in, his wiki page also talks about his time on the Foreign Relations Committee. Seems like a perfect place to be for someone who'd eventually become president.
Yeah, that's where he got a ton of experience. He was deeply involved in things like the Yugoslav wars in the 90s, and then later the Iraq War. He didn't always make popular choices, but he was never afraid to take a stand, even if it caused controversy.
He even ran for president back in '88.
He did.
Yeah.
That campaign was, well, it was interesting to say the least. It showed us that he wanted to be president, but it also exposed a weakness that could have ended his career. Remember the plagiarism scandal?
Oh, right.
It came out that he'd used a lot of material from a speech by a British politician, Neil Kinnock. It was a huge deal. The media went crazy, and he ended up dropping out of the race.
Wow, that must have been a huge blow.
It was, but it also says something about his character. He didn't try to hide from the mistake. He owned up to it, apologized, and learned from it.
So, a misstep, but not the end. He didn't give up on that presidential dream.
Yeah.
He ran again in 2008, right?
He did. But again, it just wasn't his time. The political scene had shifted, and he was up against some heavy hitters. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton. He ended up pulling out of the race pretty early on.
But then, plot twist. He gets chosen as Obama's running mate. What do you think Obama saw in Biden that made him the right choice for VP?
It was a smart move on Obama's part. Biden had decades of experience, especially in foreign policy, which was perfect because Obama was newer to the world stage. Plus, Biden was really good at connecting with working-class voters, which was a key group for Obama to win.
And let's not forget that gaffe machine thing. Maybe that made him seem more relatable.
Maybe so. But gaffes aside, they had a real connection, a sense of trust, and shared goals. And that was super important during their 8 years together.
Before we get to the Obama years, I noticed that Dodier bio mentions Biden getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Obama. That's a huge honor. What did he get it for?
Yeah, it really is. It was like a culmination of their partnership, acknowledging all that Biden did as vice president. Obama praised his loyalty, his advice, and his key role in initiatives like the Recovery Act and the Affordable Care Act. It was a high point in Biden's career, a real testament to his work with the Obama administration.
Okay, so now we're at the Obama years. I'm seeing familiar headlines already. The Recovery Act, the Affordable Care Act, negotiations with Congress.
It was a crazy time, wasn't it? Politically and just, generally.
Yeah.
The country was dealing with the fallout from that 2008 crash and the political climate.
Yeah.
It was incredibly polarized.
The Dodier bio calls Biden the, quote, point person for U.S. diplomacy. What exactly did that involve?
Basically, he was leading the charge on U.S. foreign policy. He traveled all over, met with world leaders, and helped figure out some complicated international issues. All that experience would be super valuable when he became president himself.
He was also known for being able to work with both sides of the aisle, which must have been crucial during those years with a split Congress.
Oh, for sure. Remember, the Republicans controlled the House for most of Obama's presidency. Biden's ability to build relationships and cut deals with the Republicans, it was essential for getting important laws passed and preventing government shutdowns.
So he wasn't just the friendly VP. He was a serious political player behind the scenes.
Exactly. And those years gave him valuable experience for navigating the craziness of Washington and all the political roadblocks.
Speaking of behind the scenes, you remember that big fucking deal moment? When the Affordable Care Act passed?
How could I forget? That went viral, didn't it?
Totally. It was this unscripted, authentic moment that showed how much he actually cared about the legislation.
Yeah, it reminded everyone that even with all the formality of politics, there's a real person under there with feelings and beliefs.
Well, folks, we've gone through Biden's early life, his long career in the Senate, and his time as VP. Now we're coming up on the Biden presidency. Hold on tight, because it was a wild ride. Pandemic, a divided nation, some major policy battles.
It was definitely a time that's still being debated and analyzed. We'll dig into it all after this. Talk about a tough time to take over, huh?
No kidding. Stepping into the Oval Office right in the middle of a global pandemic. A super divided country. Dealing with the aftermath of January 6th. That's a baptism by fire if I've ever seen one. What were some of the biggest hurdles he had to deal with right off the bat?
Well, the pandemic, obviously. It was still raging. Infections were going up. The economy was shaky. Everyone was anxious about the future. Biden's approach was completely different from the previous administration. He was all about science, masks, a coordinated federal response.
This Upworthy article we have highlights the COVID vaccine rollout as a major win. They're saying something like 500 million vaccinations happened.
It was a huge effort, logistically speaking. The American Rescue Plan, the one Biden signed early on, it really sped up getting those vaccines out there and funded a lot of public health programs.
The article also mentions the American Rescue Plan's effect on the economy.
Yeah.
It sounds like it was more than just pandemic relief.
Yeah, it was a massive piece of legislation. It aimed to tackle the immediate health crisis and the economic fallout all at once. Think direct payments to people, extended unemployment benefits, support for small businesses that were struggling. It even included money for things like reopening schools and making healthcare more accessible.
So it sounds like it had a wide impact, affecting individual families and the entire economy. Did it actually work? Like, did it achieve its goals?
Well, it definitely helped soften the economic blow of the pandemic. The article specifically points to a big drop in child poverty because of what the plan did. But it also contributed to inflation going up, which became a real thorn in Biden's side during his presidency.
Inflation's been a big issue lately. Everything seems to be getting more expensive. Groceries, gas, you name it. How much of that is because of the American Rescue Plan?
It's a complicated issue. Lots of things are at play, like supply chains being messed up and global energy prices. But most economists agree that all that government spending from the rescue plan did play a part in prices going up.
It's weird how one policy can have good and bad consequences, right? It's like a domino effect, impacting different parts of the economy in different ways.
That's a perfect way to put it. It shows you just how tough governing is and how you've got to think about all the possible consequences of decisions, even the unintended ones.
Okay, let's move to another big one that defined Biden's time in office: climate change. The Upworthy article says there was a $369 billion investment, the biggest ever. What were the main points of his climate agenda?
That's where the Inflation Reduction Act comes in. Big win for Biden, passed in 2022 after a ton of back and forth. It's got a bunch of funding for clean energy stuff, tax breaks for electric cars, and support for renewable energy projects.
So it sounds like a serious move towards a greener future. But some people say these policies actually hurt the economy, make energy more expensive, and even risk jobs. What do you think about that?
It's a debate that shows you just how divided people are on climate change. People who support it say investing in clean energy will create new jobs, reduce pollution, and help the economy in the long run. People against it are worried about the cost right now and what it'll do to industries that rely on fossil fuels.
It's like walking a tightrope, right? Trying to tackle climate change, but also being realistic about the economy. It's like those arguments about getting rid of plastic bags. Good for the planet, but sometimes inconvenient and pricey for businesses and shoppers.
Exactly. It shows how even small policy changes can have these ripple effects and start big debates.
Speaking of debates, Biden pulling out of Afghanistan was a controversial one for sure. The Upworthy article calls it the end of America's longest war, but it also admits the withdrawal was chaotic.
Yeah, leaving Afghanistan was a defining moment for Biden. People are still talking about it. It was a tough situation with no easy answers. Biden kept his campaign promise to end the war, but a lot of people criticized how it was handled, especially all the chaos at the Kabul airport with people trying to escape.
I remember those images. Heartbreaking. How do you think this affected Biden's image globally?
Well, it definitely hurt his reputation with some allies. They started to question whether America could be trusted to keep its promises. It also emboldened countries like Russia and China, who saw the withdrawal as a sign that America was weakening.
We've covered the pandemic, the economy, climate change, Afghanistan. What else did Biden focus on during his presidency?
This Upworthy article points out a bunch of domestic policy wins, things like lowering healthcare costs under the Affordable Care Act, putting a cap on prescription drug prices for seniors, taking on gun violence with that bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and even helping people with college debt. It paints a picture of a president who is really trying to help everyday Americans.
It's interesting how the article focuses almost entirely on the good stuff. Is that a fair assessment? Were there any big setbacks or criticisms during his time as president?
Like any presidency, there were wins and losses. Aside from the things we've already talked about, people criticized his handling of immigration. Some people felt he didn't make enough progress on things like voting rights and police reform. And his communication style, well, that got some criticism too.
The gaffe machine label stuck with him, didn't it?
Yeah.
Some people thought it was kind of charming, others found it worrying.
Yeah, it's true. That way he has a speaking off the cuff, sometimes tripping over his words. It was a blessing and a curse. It made him seem authentic and relatable, but it also made people question if he was, sharp enough for the job.
A mixed bag, like most presidents. What about his political views? He was seen as a moderate Democrat for a long time. Does that change during his presidency?
I think it did. He definitely shifted left on issues like climate change. His agenda overall became more progressive. It's probably a mix of things. The changing landscape of the Democratic Party and his own personal evolution.
Okay, we're wrapping up our deep dive into Joe Biden. Before we finish, what are your overall thoughts? What stood out to you about his presidency? How do you think he'll be remembered?
It's too soon to say for sure what his legacy will be, but I think some themes will definitely emerge. His commitment to bipartisanship, his ability to work with both sides and find some middle ground, even in this super polarized time, will probably be a big part of how people see his presidency. He truly believed in collaboration and compromise.
Every presidency has its ups and downs, right? That constant struggle between what you want to do and what you can actually get done.
Absolutely. It's a never-ending balancing act. You're dealing with all these complex issues, unexpected events popping up, and trying to get people to agree in a system that's practically built for gridlock.
Speaking of gridlock, we got to talk about that intense partisan divide. It feels like it's become the norm in American politics. Did Biden's attempts at bipartisanship actually work? Did he bridge the gap between Democrats and Republicans?
That's the million-dollar question. Historians will probably be debating that for years. He had some wins, like that infrastructure bill we talked about. But on things like voting rights and immigration, it was basically a stalemate.
Do you think he was sincere about reaching across the aisle? Or was it
Wow.
just like a political tactic?
I honestly think he was sincere. Throughout his career, he's always stressed the importance of finding common ground, building relationships, even with people who disagree with you. It's like ingrained in him from all those years in the Senate where compromise was the only way to get anything done.
I wonder what his presidency tells us about the state of American democracy. Is bipartisanship even possible anymore with everyone so divided?
That's a big question. Biden's presidency might be the test case for whether our system can actually work in this hyper-partisan age. And the results, they're kind of mixed. There were times when people worked together, but there are also these deep rifts that just seem impossible to fix.
It's like we're trapped in this loop of outrage and division, fighting about everything, never finding that middle ground. It's kind of depressing, honestly.
I get it. It's easy to feel cynical when you see how nasty and gridlocked politics has become. But it's important to remember that regular people still have power. We can participate, hold our leaders accountable, and demand a more civil, productive conversation.
Right, it's a reminder that democracy is not a spectator sport. We all got to be active players.
Exactly. We can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix it. We all have a part to play in shaping our democracy's future.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Joe Biden, I'm curious, what mark do you think he'll leave on American politics and history? What's the story future generations will tell about his presidency?
It's still early to say for sure, but I think he'll be seen as a bridge between eras. A president who navigated a really turbulent time in America. He tried to bring back a sense of normalcy and stability after the chaos of the previous years. And he set the stage for a more progressive agenda, especially to issues like climate change and social justice.
He definitely faced some unprecedented challenges. The pandemic, political polarization, the war in Ukraine. It was a presidency marked by crisis and uncertainty.
Yeah, it was. But even with all that going on, he accomplished some pretty big things. The vaccine rollout, the infrastructure bill, the American Rescue Plan, these were all significant wins that had a real impact on people's lives.
It's good to remember that even in the middle of all the turmoil and division, progress can still happen.
Exactly. And I think how we ultimately judge Biden's legacy depends on whether those moments of progress outweighed the setbacks and challenges he faced. Only time will tell.
Well, there you have it, folks. A deep dive into the life and times of Joe Biden. From his humble beginnings to the most powerful office in the land, it's been a fascinating journey. We've looked at his victories and his defeats, his strengths and weaknesses, and his unwavering belief in the American spirit.
It's a story that's still being written, a story that reflects all the complexity and sometimes contradictions of our country.
And as we move forward, it's a story that should encourage us to keep talking about what it means to be American and what kind of nation we want to build together. Thanks for joining us in this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.